Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session, TSA Pipeline Directive, What You Need to Know. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Our moderator today is Mr. Scott Augenbaum. Scott is a retired FBI agent with expertise in cybercrime prevention and cybercrime fraud. Scott has responded to thousands of cybercrime incidents over his 3 decades of service. Our panelists today are Mr. Daniel Bren, CEO and co-founder of OTORIO, and Mr. Rubi Aronashvili, founder and CEO of PSI. Daniel is a brigadier general in reserves and an InfoSec leader with over 25 years of cross-domain expertise in cybersecurity and security operations. He formed Israel's military joint cyber defense unit, serving as its first commander. Rubi is a cybersecurity advisor to large global enterprises and a national-level information security expert. He is the founding member of the Israeli Army Red Team and Incident Response Unit. Before we begin, let me remind you that a recorded version of this webinar will be available on both the PSI and OTORIO websites. We will also post a link to the recording on our social media channels. And now I would like to turn the mic over to Scott Augenbaum. Scott?
Hi, hello everyone. Good morning for me, good afternoon to you. My name is Scott Augenbaum, and I am excited to be here with you today with 2 friends of mine and we're going to talk about information security. We're going to talk about what is really going on right now and how to prevent it, especially with the combination of IT and OT. And I know both these guys are just as passionate about it as I am. So Danny, tell me a little bit about yourself and what makes you so passionate when it comes to the world of information security.
So I think that my background is very similar to yours, except of the fact that I didn't serve within the FBI. I started as a young soldier with the Israeli Defense Forces, one of the elite units. And I would say by accident, I rolled in 1994 into Matzov, the unit that was just Rubi came from as well. And I started my journey as a cybersecurity engineer. But as you can see, based on my airline, I was also the CISO. Along the road, I was also the CISO of the Joint Military Forces. Basically, I started with my career in the era when we didn't call that cyber. It was information assurance, transmission assurance. It was all about business continuity of operational systems. Back then, it was the concern of nation-state actors. It was the concern of military forces. It wasn't something that each and every common organization needs to master. Fortunately enough, over the years, I met excellent people like Rubi and became friends with them. And we were a part of this journey that tried to stay one step ahead of the adversary and continue to make sure that the military operations that basically defend on a daily basis the well-beingness of the citizens of the State of Israel are resilient. And hence then came the cyber terminology. It started with the IT environments, and unfortunately to all of us today, it has a huge effect on the OT environment that basically have a lot of are interfering with a lot of aspects of our daily lives. So this summarized 30 years of my journey with the Israeli Defense Forces.
So Ruby, tell me, how did you get your start into the world of information security?
So I think that one guy to be blamed is Danny himself, because I was recruited by Danny to Matzov. It's like the National Center for Encryption and Cybersecurity of the IDF. In 2005, actually, after my university journey, I joined Matzov. Danny at the time was really right. In 2005, Danny, you were the head of, but the head of the unit. I mean, leave the rank aside. You were just replacing your predecessor. It was a great, I would say, timing in the Israeli army, as this was the first time that a different unit that is not 8200 got something so special. And we don't get into now the internal politics here, but I think it was great, and I think that the journey that we had since that point in 2005 all the way to my me finalizing my journey in 2012 in the army was one of, I would say, the most unique and interesting services one can have in this kind of amazing organization. So for my passion is really around the technology and specifically about offensive defense.
Wow, both you guys bring so much over here to the table. And I'm going to tell you point blank, both you guys are a lot more technical than I am and both had much more stressful jobs than I actually did. Because, you know, my career revolved around dealing with issues. And during my career, I've dealt with almost 1,000 cyber crime victims, all shapes, all sizes. And I kind of call them, you know, the 4 truths to cybersecurity. And my first one is nobody ever expected to be a victim. They didn't think they had anything worth stealing. I dealt a lot of that with the utility sector. They thought because they were in Tennessee and not in New York, they weren't a target. They didn't think they had anything worth stealing. I've seen manufacturing organizations also that they said, hey, we just make a widget. So nobody ever expected to be a victim. They were all blown away, especially when the FBI showed up and told them they had a problem. And the second truth is when law enforcement would show up or when they would report the incident, and both you guys can see this, when the cyber threat actors do their damage, the government or law enforcement can't wave a magic wand and fix the problem. Putting the bad guys in jail is really, really challenging because now we're dealing with global threats. We're not dealing with threat actors in our country. They're all over the world. So when you take those two things combined, it becomes really, really depressing. But what are we seeing? And this is what I call the 4th truth to cybersecurity. A majority of the incidents that I dealt with easily could have been prevented. And my concern, and this is why I'm so excited I'm here with you, both of you today, to talk about this, because now with the increase in cybercrime, who's kidding who? It is out of control. And we see a complete merger between IT and operational technology that when I was dealing with these issues in 2011, most companies said, well, we're not a utility, we're not this. But now every organization has control systems that the bad guys want to target. And Danny, I want to start with you. What are you seeing out there on the threat landscape? What are you seeing that's changing?
So I think that and you're completely correct. I think that the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that the threat has become an economy. And threat actors, which 10 years ago, 15 years ago, were nation-state actors or quasi-nation-state actors, they have turned, they're still doing their piece, but this is again between global politics. We see professional groups of cyber criminals leveraging very potent, easy to use exploitations, and they're trying to find new ways, easy ways to monetize those capabilities. Now, they're becoming more aggressive and more active because they can, because attribution is very difficult, and because this is a global affairs thing. If I am a hacker, a cyber criminal group, sitting somewhere in Southeast Asia, and I'm attacking somebody in Tennessee, it will take ages until somebody will reach out to me. So I can leverage those capabilities and monetize that, make a lot of money, and I have ways today to even to launder this money process. And unfortunately, as you said, due to digitalization processes and modernization processes and other things, a lot of almost all organizations have a lot of OT connected to IT and to IoT, and they have been identified as low-hanging fruit, easy to follow targets, and I would like to share some, let's call that basic truths. So air gap and security by obscurity does not work anymore. It really doesn't. And democratization of access to our environments, because you need to leverage other people's expertise, is also leveraging the capability or expanding the attack surface. And every other organization, especially today in a pandemic world, depends on supply chain. So you open yourself to supply chain. So I would say that there is a huge increase in the exposure of those organizations, and everybody's still thinking detect and react. And this is the wrong way if you want to stay operational and cost effective.
And one of the things that I've seen, Ruby, during my career, and this was brought to my attention, that all of a sudden I'm alerted that the threat actors from one of our favorite nation states is scanning the HVAC systems of a major Fortune 500 company. In your mindset, what do you think they're trying to do here?
You know, when I look at this kind of attacks in general, I always split it to two things, right? You have pain points in an organization and pressure points in an organization. Pain points, as you can hear from the phrase, very simple phrase, if someone is going to hit that, it's going to be a lot of pain for the organization. That means you're going to experience some kind of damage, loss, reputational loss, and so on and so forth. The second part, the pressure points, those are things that once you are able to hit those, you have a leverage on the organization to be able to squeeze, in a way, financial benefits for your own. Of course, there is some kind of common group between those two separate groups, right? There are pain points that are also pressure points, but today we see that the attacks are going more and more to the pressure points. The reason for that is very simple. The economy that Danny just mentioned before is something that is huge and very efficient. As you can see, even in the US, which is a country that by definition, by law, was maybe exposed and expressed as one of the countries worldwide that is not going to negotiate with terrorism, right? It's not going to pay ransom, and so on and so forth. And we see lately that the situation and the force is actually different, right? When you have a pressure point that is good enough, someone is going to pay. And those pressure points, unfortunately, today are not being taken into consideration in overall cybersecurity programs and cybersecurity strategy of organizations. So you talked about HVAC systems, right? Why do you care? You don't have business assets there, right? You don't have your data there. And still, if you are going to be in a situation that, for example, your facility management environment and your air conditioner in a day like here in Israel, 40 degrees Celsius, right? And you don't have the air conditioning on, I won't see anyone in the office here. And if you're able to do that for a long time, this is a very nice pressure point. Maybe not the most sophisticated one, but a very nice one. How many organizations that you know are actually taking care of the cybersecurity related data or the HVAC systems? That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, and that boggles my mind a little bit over here, because now, I mean, just think about it. The bad guys are able to get in, that's connected to the internet. Nobody knows it. How are we patching these things? But you bring up a good point with ransomware. You know, the number one question I get all the time is ransomware. Do we pay the ransom or do we not? And just recently, we had the Colonial Pipeline. I'm going to be honest, guys, that didn't surprise me at all, because in 2016, the FBI was putting out guidance to the private sector in the US. And my job with the FBI was to go out and talk to these large organizations, and none of them expected to be a victim. So here we see that the cyber criminals are able to get into the technology, the IT network of Colonial Pipeline, and they come this close to getting access to the OT network. Again, the US today put out some guidance that we've seen the Chinese government do this between 2011 and 2013. Now, Danny, that to me scares me. I mean, because if they're able to get into that part of the network, I think they can get into the other side. You know, and there's so many different things. Talk a little bit about that aspect over here.
So thank you for the great question. First of all, I don't know how many of the audiences are familiar with the Florida water supply attack that actually reached the safety zone. They changed the level of chemicals in the water. This is already an OT environment. Another aspect of the HVAC question that you asked, because people want to basically make their lives simpler, they manage and control the HVAC system from their own computer that runs the OT system and the IT system. So Unfortunately, the bad news I have to say is it's just a matter of time when we will see a very massive, successful OT attack, OT ransomware that will have some safety-related or business continuity-related issues. The IT, OT, IoT convergence brings all at the same plane, and the fact that they stopped at the IT level is because they could leverage the pressure points that Ruby was talking about, and somebody paid. But when they will have a different or a more broader target than just hitting a pressure point, maybe wanting to hit a pain point, then you'll see successful OT ransomware. If you look at 2019 February, I think the Snake OT ransomware, which was targeting a refinery in Bahrain, it is already a pain point that somebody tried to push. So I would say that the only differentiator that there is between the successful IT attack, ransomware attack, and a successful OT attack is the inherently insecure environment that you have in OT. IT, it's much, the maturity level in IT systems is much more advanced. You have inherent challenges with OT environments, and now when you connect those two, then you bring a lot of connectivity and potential threats into your backyard. And this is what you need to remember.
That's such a great point, because remember, the old days, the OT network stood alone. And now they're being completely merged with the IT network. So picture this, I'm the one, I have to break the bad news to a utility organization that they were targeted. And you know, it's never a good day when the FBI shows up at your door. And what did we discover? They had a complete flat network, and the cyber criminals were able to get into the IT network. They were able to move laterally through the network, and they were able to compromise this one piece of technology that there was a known vulnerability for. And back then, all the cyber criminals would do is go out, they'd go to Shodan HQ, they would, back in the day, they would figure it out, they'd find this piece of technology, and they would be able to compromise the HMI. And they could have done horrible things. They did not. That's what scares me, and that's what we're seeing right now. And this is a journey right now, Ruby, for a lot of the CISOs. Because when I talk to a lot of the CISOs, they keep telling me this is the operational side of the network. I only handle the business side. So how do we change that mindset for people?
I mean, that's a great point, because, you know, the separation between operational security, IT security, and more than that, facility management, those are the three items that we usually see in organizations. You know, we come into an organization and we say, hey, who is responsible for the security cameras here, right? And they tell you, hey, it's not us, this is facility management. Okay, who is responsible for those specific PLCs, HMIs, historian servers, and so on that are connected to the same network? Tell you, okay, that's not us also, this is the operational manager, and it's not under our responsibility. You know, working in this kind of structure, the things that are falling between the cracks, those are the things that will be used as the foundation for the attack or next attack against the organization. So I think consolidation of duties under, you call it CISO, you call it CSO, you call it whatever you want, but a single responsibility in an organization, someone that oversees everything, including everything from physical security through product security, through OT security, IT security, IoT security, and cloud security, it's a must. That's something that organizations cannot go forward in the near future without securing those items together. And I tell you more than that. When you talk about attacks that almost happened, right? We always talk about things that almost happened. We know about a lot of things that did happen, right? Maybe that's not the forum to expose those things, but you know, we have a very famous case that we know very closely is Stuxnet, right? This is one of them. This is a clear attack against the OT environment. That the damage or the consequences there were very clear. But I think that since then we've experienced so many similar attacks worldwide that are not, maybe not public. And then the conclusion and the, let's say maybe the outcome of it was a set of guidelines, as you mentioned before, that was coming from the governments or different governments worldwide. You know, one question that I can ask you maybe, is, do you think that those, and again, I'm trying to not to be speculative here, too speculative, let's say, but do you think that those kind of just guidelines are good enough for the industry? I mean, there is a huge difference between practical tools to just some kind of directives, which I'm sure that we'll speak about, because just yesterday we've seen a new directive coming from TSA and so on, which I think is great, by the way, don't get me wrong. But the question that I always hear from customers, is it going to be another burden, another obstacle for us just to tick a box because the regulator is asking for that, or that is going to be an actual segue, an accelerator for true cybersecurity improvement in organizations? What do you think?
That's a great question you're asking me, because one of the things that I tell people is these regulatory frameworks are not a security strategy, okay? Because when you read some of them, you know what it says? You need a pen test. All right, you did your pen test and you had 3,000 findings and you do nothing with it. You need a risk assessment. Okay, you need endpoint protection. But so just let's make this correct. Information regulatory compliance, because is not the same thing as a strategy. And this is why the mindset shift is so important, because I'm going to tell you what concerns me that nobody's talking about. Just 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was released in the news of the Rockstar data dump. And what did that mean? On the dark web, there were 8.8 billion usernames and password combinations. Okay? There's only 7.8 billion people in the world, okay? So almost every password they got their hands on. And so what does that mean? Okay, think about all of these organizations that we deal with. Think about the utility companies. Think about the manufacturing companies. Think about the government agencies that aren't using two-factor authentication. Bad guys get access to, you know, a Microsoft Outlook account or their email account, and now they log into the organization and they get access to the shared folders, they get the directories, they get the network maps, and things just, and now they get access to everything, because most organizations look at information security as a cost, not an investment. And these are the discussions that the C-levels need to be having and talking about this, because it's just that simple. The cybercrime problem keeps getting worse. And according to Cybersecurity Ventures, in 2015, the global cost of cybercrime was $3 trillion. And by 2021, it was expected to go up to 6 trillion. That's 100% increase. Now, there's a lot of debate saying, well, the number's a trillion and number's 6 trillion. Does it really matter if it's a trillion or 6 trillion? I can't wrap my hand around that. And now we keep seeing so many things that are available on the dark web and the cyber, and that's what scares me, because that's why I think the cybercrime problem is going to continue to get worse. Because now we have the dark web, which is where all the usernames and passwords are. This is where the hackers are keeping their tools. But I kind of see this as a shared working environment, where the low-level cyber criminals are able to get tips from the high-level cyber criminals. We see nation-state actors, they're all hanging out together. And what are they doing? They're building their networks. We've just recently even seen that in the Colonial Pipeline. They're getting together, they're sharing their tools, so you don't have to have a lot of skills to pull that off. Ruby, well, should CISOs and C-suite, shouldn't they not be taking this seriously?
I think that we see a change in the market. We cannot see that we cannot say that this is not going to change or is not changing as we speak, right? So I think that C-level executives do take it seriously, or more seriously than in the past, because in most cases they were either target or victim of this kind of an attack, or they heard about someone very close to them that already got hit by this kind of attack. So it's getting closer and closer to most organizations. So I don't think that there are a lot of organizations today that don't take cybersecurity, at least in awareness level, seriously. Now, the distance between, or the difference between knowing about cybersecurity or thinking about cybersecurity to investing in cybersecurity is still a difference that needs to be breached, or this gap needs to be breached. And that's a process, I think, that's something that is improving with time. But one thing that I can tell you, and just to connect to your point, is that you see in the darknet as an example, the dark web, right? See how efficient the attackers are in, sharing information, speaking with each other, learning from each other, evolving their techniques, business models, right? See how efficient it is that you attack one company, Kaseya, right? And from there, you have a pyramid approach, right? In which from there, you get to other companies that they have their own customers and third parties that are actually consuming their own supply chain capabilities. I mean, that's an amazing business case, because if you think about it, you attack once, the most sophisticated attack maybe that you can think about. It wasn't, but let's assume that it's the most sophisticated attack. A lot of investment, but it's one-time investment. And the benefit that you get out of it is amazing. Unfortunately, for us, right, the offensive side is becoming smarter and faster because of information sharing, because of cooperation between different parties, things that unfortunately, again, doesn't happen in things that don't happen enough in the defensive side. So another example that I can give you, if we go back to the directive that we've seen from the US government, which again, I think it's a great step forward, but again, look at the things that they published there. First, everything is very vague, right? It's not clear, as you mentioned. Conduct a pen test, right? That's not good enough. But let's look even at the order of things, right? First, develop a contingency plan or recovery plan that will be implemented into the organization. Then have security controls to protect the business critical assets or those specific ransomware targets, for example. Then they talk about security operations like detection and response, 24/7 person that is available to the TSA to report and so on. And only then they are talking about design reviews and penetration testing, when the order should be really the opposite. Let's first understand what is the problem, right? Let's map that, let's identify that. And let's then solve the things based on the risk-based approach and not based on a template again, or a compliance-based template that we see in different organizations. Just change the order, do that from the bottom up. I think that organizations will practically change their cybersecurity capabilities and their cybersecurity maturity level. And that's something that can be easily done given tools that are out there today in the market, using the knowledge that is already there, but unfortunately is not shared in the right way to the right people. That is at least my point of view.
So yeah. If I may continue Ruby's point, so basically, if an organization would like to comply and follow this regulatory order, then is bound to a life of responding to incidents. When Ruby suggested, hey, let's build the future in a sense that we are not vulnerable, or we are less vulnerable, and then instead of managing a daily reactive approach to what the bad actors are doing, let's build correctly the architecture, the fences. Let's put all the controls in place. It will be cheaper, it will be much more efficient, and it will enable us to continue operations without any disturbance.
So, before I go into my last, I want to ask you, so what are some of the steps that the CISOs should be taking? I like that. What are the 4 things right now that you would think? Those were my things, know what's on your network, patch what's on your network, reduce your attack surface, have your visibility. Are you allowing outbound traffic going from your operational network going to a threat country? If you are doing, because remember, prevention is ideal, but detection is a must. Do you know when traffic is beaconing out of your network and going to a foreign government? I want to ask both of you guys, give me a couple of things that, takeaways that our information security friends can start thinking about.
So I would, Ruby, with your permission, I would connect a couple of things that you said. prevention and protection. Take the right measures, be prepared, and don't react. This is the must. Detection, it's important, it's imperative in cases where the first line of defense failed. But let's go to Ruby's point. It's not just taking care of your organization. You need to take care of also of your supply chain, because if I would follow Ruby's scenario, and I am provided by one of my automation HMI vendors, and he is hacked, then the bad guys have the highway into my network. And the reason is because I'm letting this supply chain vendor the highway into my network because he is doing maintenance, operational performance optimization, or whatever service I am paying him to do. So if we're taking this waterhole type of scenario, if we are taking that into the OT environment, so it's imperative that you are taking and enforcing those type of mandatory sets, architectural sets, not only on your organization, but also to contractual requirements on your supply chain providers. Otherwise, you would build the best mechanisms, but you will let those bad players come through the back door.
Anything you want to follow up on that, Ruby?
I think that in general, right, if you take one step up to the strategy, right, the concept of assess first, and then prevent, then with everything that is open, work on detection and response in this order, cyclic order, that's the right way to do things. So if you talk about 4 things, right, and this is very high level, I'm not talking about specific solutions. So I would say assess, and assessment includes visibility, as you just mentioned very correctly, right? If you don't know what you have, you can protect it. So asset discovery, asset identification, asset management, those are basic items that if you don't have them, you're very far away from the solution. But once you have that, and then you have preventive measures in place, taking it even to a much easier thing, make sure that the password for your domain admin is not the name of your organization 123, right? Like a SolarWinds 123 that we had before and similar things. I mean, those are basic hygiene, I would say, capabilities or hygiene, steps that you need to take in every organization. And unfortunately, those items are the ones that are being missed. So whether you have the most shiny EDR solution in the network, whether multi-factor authentication is available and configured to the right place, again, those are all important things. But if still the domain admin has a password that anyone can guess and connect with via Office 365 from the outside, then yeah, you can put whatever you want there. It won't be sufficient. If you ask my 2 cents, right, regarding what are the most common capabilities that we think that we see based on our assessments in multiple organizations, we do see that identity protection, any kind of identity protection, would be the first thing that I would invest in. Second thing would be the endpoints, right? Because we see that most of the attacks are going through the endpoint. Now, endpoints could be Windows machines, Linux machines, Mac machines, but also PLCs, HMIs. Those are also important things to protect. You can ask yourself whether you can protect those or not, right? Because the vendors are more legacy. In the OT environment, the legacy problem is a big problem. But again, at least the concept should be there. How you protect them, whether direct or virtual patching, that's something that we can definitely discuss. But this is something that you need to take into consideration. Then when you take data as the third item to protect, data, not only business data, but private data as well, which is again a pressure point, maybe not a pain point, because you don't care if everyone knows your, I don't know, you're Uber and you have all the customers in the world. You don't care that everyone knows that you have millions of customers, but the regulator cares about that, and then you are in a problem. Then yeah, this is a pressure point that organizations need to take into consideration very seriously. And the last point at least from my point of view, should be around operational continuity, whether it's IT, OT, or whatever. We all talk about backups, right? Backup is something that is very nice, but backup is only data. What about operational continuity in the sense of full functioning environment that will be a replacement in case of one functioning environment is not there anymore? Those are things that need to be at least taken into consideration as the items. And this is the 1, 2, 3, 4 that I have at least in.
Yeah, and backing up is not a strategy. Backing up is just backing up. We got a bunch of questions from the audience, but I want to ask both you guys a question. I mean, both of you are leading subject matter experts in both of your respective fields. We have IT, we have OT, we have you guys partnering up together. I'm dying to know, what are you guys doing to help resolve this problem?
So I think that the easiest answer is that we are following what Ruby just said, doing a comprehensive assessment, identifying the minimal effort that would cover most exposures and risks, and providing visibility, but not only visibility about the assets, but also the role that they play in the business continuity or operational continuity or manufacturing production continuity in the different business cases. And then if I would go to one of your previous points, make sure as a second tier with the with both companies that you have proper segmentation or virtual patching, both in the OT, which is a little bit more challenging, but also in the IT. And you need to do that on a continuous way, because if you're not doing that on a continuous way, then it's just a matter of time that you'll get back to square zero. So I would say that the two teams that have a long history of collaborations and share the same views about the mechanisms now are bringing a single pane glass joint solution that continuously assess, provides visibility, identify exposures, and gives you protective measures to be one step ahead of the penetrator. And I think this is what we bring together to the table.
That's great. From your point of view, Ruby, what do you guys, tell me a little bit about the partnership.
I think that, you know, taking into consideration a coverage that takes into consideration not only the, let's say, the perimeter, the access points, and the depth of the IT network, but also what we call the consequences in the OT environment, IoT environment, and so on, to get visibility that includes concept of digital twin, concept of virtual patching, concepts that, you know, the vendor cannot provide it to you. The vendors that are out there in the market today, also in the OT environment, provide you mainly visibility. And, you know, being able to see something and not protect it is still a challenge. And I think that this connection together brings things that I didn't see in any other place. Now, the point from my point of view, really, this communication, this partnership brings together more than years of mutual experience in the Army, which I think was proven to be highly effective. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? But in the Israeli Army, as one of the most targeted organizations worldwide, we stand against, you know, the most sophisticated attacks ever. And this approach was proven to be effective. So taking this military approach in mind, right, making a civilian change to take it to the business world, and then integrate it in order to take, you know, the essence, the important things out of the cybersecurity chaotic situation and bring it in a very visual, measurable way. That's exactly what we do. So one thing that I would say, when we do something, you can measure it all the way from the beginning, where you are now, where you are in 2 months, and where you're going to be in 1 year.
Well, guys, we covered a lot of information here, but we got some really good questions that are coming in. And, you know, how do we convert what we just talked about into a practical cybersecurity work plan for an organization?
Yeah, I can start if you want. I think that from our point of view, you know, taking this amorphic and complex, as I said, chaotic situation into a structured approach that we already mentioned here would be the first step. Now, how do you do that practically? Assessing your organization should have at least 3 layers. First is asset discovery. That's something that you need to work. This is a comprehensive exercise in which you identify your assets, whether those are internet-facing, internal, OT, IT, IoT, or cloud-based items. It's not an easy work, but it's very, let's say, structured approach that you can take, right? Because sometimes you need to identify owners and so on. So it's not always very short work, but that's definitely something that you need to do. and it's definitely something that that will be the first block in the process that we are going to follow. Second thing would be to assess the maturity level of those items you mentioned before. Patch management, right? Patch management is one of the items that needs to be taken into consideration, but more than that, basic hygiene, password management, identity management, access control, segmentation, segregation, IT/OT segmentation, and access control to those environments, protection of the control and production environment. And those items, those are basic things that can be done with basic capabilities, firewall-based capabilities in the organization. The third item is, once you identify the gaps, you need to prioritize those specific items that will be the important items to take into consideration, and start with implementation of those. Two items that has to be, in any case, prioritized. One of them is monitoring capabilities, being able to identify, detect. You mentioned, for example, beaconing outside of the network. That's a very specific item that has to be taken into consideration. However, a very important one, right? So once you are able to identify those items, you have visibility, and you close the loop of visibility. That means starting from asset discovery all the way to being able to identify threats on those assets. And the last item that has to be prioritized there is also the response capabilities that needs to be integrated in any cybersecurity kind of capability. Danny will mention, of course, that you need a predictive capability to be able to know what is going to come next. And that's definitely an important item, and I think that this is a capability that you can definitely get from this specific partnership that we have here. Danny, I think this is at least how I see the things. Would love to hear
I totally agree. I would just add one item to vulnerability management, and vulnerability management doesn't necessarily mean just identifying the right CVEs, but understanding the criticality of those effects on your organization. Following Rubi's protective or predictive type of exposures, I would say that this is part of the assessment. Don't just assess or have visibility on your assets, but also try to understand the network topology, the processes. And I think that one of the main challenges could be overcome, because this is a very high resource process. I would say that we need to do that on a continuous way, and the only way to do that continuously is to automate and use an automation solution that does the assessment, ongoing visibility, ongoing monitoring, and ongoing exposure identification. Of course, also the detection and response part that Ruby mentioned as the cycle of covering the entire framework. So I would, first of all, follow what Ruby said, but I would try and identify, and I know that I'm not objective on this part, third-party providers like SAI and OTORIO that could provide you with an ongoing, affordable, and simple solution that will give you continuous visibility, continuous vulnerability detection, prioritization of your exposures, and then, of course, very simple mitigation playbooks.
So we're talking about complex things here, and to make things even more complicated, a bunch of new regulations have come out, and now we have to figure these things out. Tell me a little bit about these new regulations that have just come out, and how's that going to impact organizations?
So I think that as we talked about that in the previous session, those regulations are pushing. Unfortunately, this is the right word that I have to that, pushing organization to follow correctly the process that Ruby just said. Now, if you want just to tick the box, this is enough. If you really want to do that and have a strategy and process and a systematic approach to that, you need to understand the regulations. So I know that the technology that was developed by SAI and to the IT environment and ours to the OT environment basically provides the regulation out of the box. So you don't necessarily need to be the smartest guy in understanding the regulation, as long you know that you need to follow that, and you identify the right partner that can provide you with this data or information or know-how. And if you're a utility provider or water supplier or a manufacturer, you don't necessarily need to be an expert in how to do cybersecurity properly, but you need to identify the correct partners to do that with you.
And you bring up, a point here. We have these new regulations, and if people are doing what you're saying, they're going to comply with the regulations. If you work on your strategy and we do what we've all talked about in these points, you're going to comply. But if you just go for the regulations, you're not going to be safe. So it might seem pretty easy for a lot of the big companies to be able to follow. Ruby, what about the smaller companies who don't have that dedicated cybersecurity staff? There's a huge gap. I know it's in the United States. I know it's in Israel. We do not have enough technical people to be looking at this stuff all the time. So is it hopeless for small companies?
Well, let's try to evaluate that for a second, right? The first directive that we've seen in May includes several requirements. The first one would be reporting, right? Something happens, you need to report within 12 hours. That's a challenge by itself because, when you're convinced that you have an issue or an incident, usually 12 hours already are way long behind you, right? Until you understand that this is the situation. Second is you need to have someone, a technical person, this is a requirement, that can answer questions coming from TAS and CISA and on a continuous basis 24/7. That's something that is also a requirement for a small organization. That's something that can be quite tough, right? What is really 24/7? That's someone or some people that needs to work in shifts and be on call at any given moment. That's something that can be quite challenging for small organizations. Then you have another requirement to conduct, this is something very amorphic, to conduct a penetration test or security assessment to your environment. That is the first directive. Then you go to the next one, to the second one that was published yesterday, and then they are talking more about the security controls that need to be implemented, more around contingency plan and recovery plan, and then they talk about security measures and controls against ransomware, and then they are talking about design review, right? Again, those things are very high level, but it's not very hard to comply with. It's just going to be very costly if you are doing that only to tick the box. Again, that's the point. So my point is that if you take the same directives, put them in the right order, provide specific requirements there, what needs to be done, provide a framework for that I want to check this item, and this item, report about password strength, report about multi-factor authentication, and so on and so forth, it will be much more actionable. And even if you work on ticking the boxes, still you have things that you need to tick the box. That means that you need to test something. And that's the difference from my point of view from something that just generates noise, right? Everyone is now stressed to be able to comply with that, to something that you get value for. And I think that taking it from just a requirement to value creation requirement, it's not very hard to take the difference. It just needs to be clearer. Also, the government needs to put subject matter experts to let's say to require the right things. That's also something that needs to happen on the government side. But from my point of view, for small organizations, that's definitely an issue because it's not very easy to comply with. For larger organizations, it's also an issue because then they have different multiple parts of the organizations that need to work in one synchronization process. That's something that will be also challenging, and I'm sure that we'll see more and more challenges coming from these specific directives.
This has been amazing stuff, and the value bombs that both of you guys have dropped here today. We have to remember that a majority of the cybercrime victimization could be prevented. It's not easy, but with the work that both of you guys are doing with your experience and being able to take the operational technology side, the informational technology side, merging it together kind of gives me hope a little bit over here that people are looking into this problem. We just need to go out. We need to educate people about this. Organizations need to take this seriously. Information security, especially what you guys are doing, is not a cost for for an organization, it needs to be seen as an investment, because unfortunately the segment of the information security marketplace that's making the most amount of money is, my friends, in intrusion response. Because when you have a problem, and especially now in what we're seeing with the operation technology and IT merging and the ransomware threat actors and the dark web, and now we have all these regulations, you will end up paying 100 times more to fix the problem than you could. So as we wrap up, Danny and Ruby, I want to give you both the last word. Danny, what's the one thing here that you want people to take away from our discussion today?
So be optimistic, and if you take a proactive approach, then we are going to prevail. The good guys are going to prevail.
Yeah,
Ruby.
I would say start with basic foundation, basic hygiene would take you a very long way. And then when you are good there, look at the next generation solutions.
Danny, Ruby, thank you. I mean, that's why I always have a big smile on my face, because I love what I do. I learned a lot here. I know from the questions from the audience, a lot of people got some great information. And thank you so much for bringing me in here today.
Thank you so much for having us.